Well, good morning, everyone. We've sort of been absent for the last few weeks, but it's nice to be back in our own church for a while. I don't know how many of you know this, but you and us as a church are part of the Baptist World Alliance. You're probably thinking, what's that? The Baptist World Alliance is an alliance of churches from all around the world, 178,000 Baptist churches, of which we are one. They're in 134 countries, and there are 53 million of us. So we're not alone. Lynn and I had the privilege of taking our 3 grandchildren to Brisbane to attend the Congress of the Baptist World Alliance, which is hardly ever held in the Southern Hemisphere, so we thought we should go. We took our 3 grandchildren, that's Fiona and Mike's kids, for those of you that know Fiona and Mike, and it was just such a blessing to watch our 3 grandchildren just open up like flowers spiritually. In fact, one of them has come back and said, I want to be baptized, which is just so cool. So that's our chocolate stuff. Just to see what God is doing. Wonderful to hear stories of people from around the world, Christians who are living the good news of Jesus, sometimes under terrible persecution. Some of the people who wanted to come to the conference couldn't even get there because the Australian government thought that they were from a risky nation and so they weren't allowed in. You're going to hear a lot more of this stuff, by the way, from the next 3 weeks. So we're going to try and steal all the good bits so that all the others who follow us have nothing left to say that's any good. Jan's looking at me. You know, the family of God is an amazing thing. And as you travel and you meet believers in other countries, you just realize what an incredible privilege it is to be part of the family of God. I spoke to a pastor from Papua New Guinea. He's pastoring the Baptist church in the capital, Port Moresby, and he said to me, do you know Sam Emery? I said, yeah, I know Sam and Elmer well. Sam is from Rotorua. And just like that, you know, you've got a connection. Sit next to another pastor from Nagaland in India, and when he saw my tag that said that I was from New Zealand, he said, oh, do you know Craig Vernal? Yeah? Know Craig very well. He's the pastor of Bethlehem Baptist just over there. And you realize we belong to a big family of God's people all around the world, and we are part of something much bigger than us. And this conference for us was like a foretaste of heaven. It really was.
So it was very moving to be there on the first night in this huge auditorium, sort of in a U shape with seating coming down and then on the floor and the stage there, and just looking around and seeing all these people, all different colours, and obviously from around the world, some people in national costume. And when we started to sing, we had a fantastic band, and when we started to sing, we were just choked up. We could hardly even sing. And watching these 3 grandchildren, Reuben, Emma and Reese, joining in and thinking what a privilege it is to be able to bring our kids here. Just so awesome. So we had presenters. There were lots of things to go to. There were the main events, and then there were seminars and Bible studies, and we had presenters from every continent who spoke at different times. They came from Australia, Brazil, Croatia, France, Kenya, Korea, Lebanon, New Zealand, some of us, Nicaragua, Syria, Togo, the United States, and that's only to quote a few. There were so many speakers. Now, Dr. Elijah Brown, who some of us actually heard over at Bethlehem Baptist last year, and he's what inspired us to go. He's the General Secretary and CEO of the Baptist World Alliance. He's just a young guy in his 40s. He's the youngest person they've ever had to lead us. And in his opening address, he spoke on the theme, which you can see, living the good news. It's not about sharing the good news or spreading the good news, but actually living the good news. And that was the theme that kept coming through the whole conference, and made you stop and think, what does it actually mean to live the good news? And he really challenged us that it's each one of us. And the good news is Jesus in us. The good news is the gospel. It's what Jesus came to do. And it's not just, the good news isn't just contained in the Bible. The good news is actually in us because we have Jesus in us. So it was quite challenging. And there was a big emphasis on not just knowing the Bible, not just going to Bible studies and listening to great sermons and, filling our heads up, maybe even filling our hearts up, but actually doing it. There was such an emphasis on doing it. And it's all about getting out of our comfortable lives and living the gospel, making that our number one priority. And the way it was presented, it was such a challenge to us Westerners, who we have so many other things that claim our time and our money and all that sort of thing. To be with some of these people from parts of the world where there's a lot of persecution, to actually be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus, has a massive cost. And for them, the people that we met, they are living the gospel, and I found that really, really challenging. So, yes, some of them are facing poverty, persecution and displacement, and yet they are passionate about living the good news.
There were lots of speakers who made a huge impression on us, but one of them, Lynn and I went to a Bible study led by a Lebanese woman. Her name is Micheline Markar, and she and her husband have moved from Lebanon to start a Baptist church in one of the most dangerous places in the world, in Damascus, in Syria. And they began this Baptist church ministering to the poorest of the poor, people who had absolutely nothing. And their church has grown to become one of the largest churches in Damascus. They'd been there a while, and they felt the Lord was speaking to them about making a movie, and they'd had no experience of making movies at all before. They had no clue how to make a movie, but they felt that the Lord was telling them to make this movie called Damascus Speaks, a Christian movie that explains the relationship between the Apostle Paul and the city of Damascus. You know the story, don't you, of Paul on his way to Damascus to persecute Christians and meeting Jesus on the way, and his life was transformed. So they made this movie, and I can't remember the name of the film festival, but it won an award at a film festival. It wasn't Cannes, but it was some film festival. And President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, who was a tyrant, who's just recently been ousted as president, he got to hear about this movie, and he got a copy and watched it. When Assad, a Muslim, watches a Christian movie and is so impressed that when he goes to meet Vladimir Putin in Moscow, he thinks, I need to take a gift with me to give to Putin. I know what I'll give Putin. I'll give him a copy of this movie. Can you get that? She's telling this story of this movie that God got them to make. The president of Syria gets it, likes it, and takes it as a gift to Vladimir Putin. One dictator, Muslim dictator, giving a Christian movie to a Russian dictator. God is at work. Don't ever limit what the Holy Spirit can do. Micheline told us of a man called George who desperately wanted children, and he and his wife couldn't have children, and she said in our culture, in the Arab culture, she said, if you can't have children, you're despised, you're looked down on. There's something wrong with you because children are your inheritance. And George was in church, and an ISIS terrorist came into the church with an AK-47 rifle and started shooting. And he shot 25 people, and there were many more who were wounded. Instead of taking cover, George, and she described George, he's got a wonderful sense of humor, Micheline, she said he didn't have a six-pack. She said he was a skinny little guy. But she said instead of taking cover, George ran towards this terrorist, jumped on him, just as he detonated a suicide vest. And she said, George saved the lives of over 400 people. And she said that happened in Damascus just under 3 weeks ago. This is the sort of situation that some of these people who are at the conference are living in. It was just so humbling to mix with people who are risking their lives to share the good news of Jesus.
Another speaker that we heard, he talked about the church and the fact that the church was actually created for God's mission. That's what we're here for. That's our job, is to fulfill God's mission, the mission that Jesus started. It's the whole purpose. And he talked about the fact that we have the gospel. It's the power of God to salvation for everyone who will believe. The gospel is Jesus. It's all about Jesus and the fact that he came and lived among us. We know this, but it was a good reminder. He came and lived among us. He died. He took our sin. He rose from the dead. He is now with the Father, and he's drawing people to God. He's drawing people. He drew us, and he's drawing people. And our job is to take that gospel, that good news, and live it. We're to do the same work that Jesus did. Jesus actually commanded us to do his work, to continue. So we need to see, not just look forward to God in eternity, but to see what we're here for now. And we need to see now what God is doing here, what he's doing now, and join in with him. We need to see people. We need to listen to them. And we need to be present, really be present with the people around us. And ask God, this was the challenge that came through. Ask God to show you what's happening in the people that we are mixing with. What's God doing? And try and see that. We need to listen to God's voice. Ask ourselves, what is he doing? And the reminder was, it's not just about our 1 hour in church here on a Sunday morning. It's about our daily living. Once again, we need to live the gospel wherever we are, whoever we are with. And so we need to think about the theme. What does it actually mean for me? What does live the gospel mean? And I've been thinking about that quite a lot since we got home. It's just really challenging, and it's something we need to do is really ponder on that question.
Two of the influential speakers at the conference were Rick and Kay Warren. This couple founded Saddleback Church in California in 1980. They began with 60 people. The church is now over 25,000 people that meet. And Rick Warren was named he retired in 2022. He was named in Time magazine on a cover article as the most influential spiritual leader in America and one of the 100 most influential people in the world. His books have been translated in over 200 languages, and they said something I thought, did I hear that right? But there was a comment made when Rick was being introduced, that his books have sold more copies than any other book in history apart from the Bible. I thought, you're kidding me, but apparently that's so. These two were both inspiring speakers, and I didn't hear Kay speak, but you did, Jan, didn't you? So I'm hoping you'll tell a little bit about Kay Warren and what she said. So I'm not going to steal your thunder there. We went to a Bible study that Rick Warren was leading. Tell us about that.
So getting back to my theme that I keep coming back to, he teased that out quite a bit more, and I found this really inspiring. He talked about the work that Jesus did while he was on earth, and he kept saying, I am here to do the work that God has given me to do, the work of preaching, the work of telling the good news of the kingdom. And then he shared some scriptures with us, which could go up on the screen one by one. So, from John, I have given you an example to follow. So that's if we look at the life of Jesus and what he did. Now do as I have done for you. We can read that just quickly, but think about it. Jesus is telling us to do what he has done for us. We need to be able to do that. The next one, now that you know these things, all these things that he's been teaching, you will be blessed if you do them. So once again, that emphasis on don't just listen, let's do it. From John chapter 20. And so then he said, just as the Father has sent me, now I am sending you. And he talked about the fact it's easy to think, well, it's for those people who are good at evangelism, those people who are good at with people and with being able to talk. But no, he's saying it's for everybody. And in Mark, go into all the world and preach the good news to everyone, everywhere. Once again, it was do it. And then he said, okay, don't get scared about preaching. Like, you don't have to be a preacher like Scott or David or other people who get up here and preach. Preaching's really just telling. It's just telling the story. So, once again, do it. The next thing, excuse me, I've got to have a drink. The best part of what he said that I really liked, and I think maybe you will as well. If you're wanting to share the gospel, live the gospel with people, and maybe talk, you don't have to have a plan for what to say. You don't have to memorize a speech. You don't have to be able to spout off the 4 spiritual laws or the bridge to life. They're good tools to have at the right time, but you don't have to start there. Just tell your stories of faith. Be a witness. I thought this was really cool. Just be a witness to what God's done in your life. You don't have to be an attorney, and you don't have to be a salesman. You just have to be a witness. You don't have to have all the evidence, because that's what scares us sometimes. I don't think I could answer the questions. You don't have to have all the evidence. Just your story as a witness to what God has done in you, what God's doing in your life, in the past and now. He said, think back over your life. You have 1,000 testimonies. I thought that was so cool. You have 1,000 testimonies. Things that you've seen God do in your life. They may be little things, but it's telling what God has done in you. That's living the gospel. And you have seen God at work in your life, I'm sure. I have. Maybe despite pain and suffering and sorrow, difficulties with relationships, whatever your story is, wherever you've been and whatever you've done, and whatever you've seen God be part of, those are your stories of faith. So he said, listen to people and what they're saying. Listen, really listen to people. And as they're talking and as you hear their story, there will be things that God has done in your life that will relate to that and that you can share. You can tell how God met you, how he gave you peace, how he gave you hope in a situation, maybe how he gave you courage to step out and do something. showed you a way through when you thought there was no way, how he sustained you. You don't have to have one testimony. You have many. Use them, live the gospel. For me, an example is, since Fiona, our daughter, died last year, I think I've had more opportunities to talk about my faith than at any previous time in my life. I can share that my faith, despite my grief, which I still have deeply, despite my grief and sorrow, God has been with me, He sustains me. He gives me peace. He gives me hope, not despair. And the fact that He worked in Fiona and gave her those things, and that helped me. God helped her, and through that helped me. That's a really relevant testimony to share, because people are going through so many raw things in their lives. And you can have a testimony, just gently say, this is how it's been for me, and this is where God met me. I think the other thing is, the last thing I want to say is that, we've got to keep the Holy Spirit in mind for how we approach all of this. One speaker said, read the book of Acts several times quickly. And I thought that's really interesting. Just go through it, start again, and see how many times the Holy Spirit is mentioned. How the Holy Spirit was the one who enabled, the one who was doing this in us, in them, in all the people, the amazing things they did. Empowering the early Christians to do the work of God, to live the gospel. And how much more do we need the Holy Spirit today in us, enabling us to live the gospel.
I sat next to a Nepalese man who told me how the Holy Spirit had led him and his wife. He and his wife were refugees who arrived in Australia, and they were fasting and praying and saying, Lord, where do you want us to go? What do you want us to do? And they felt that God was leading them to Tasmania, because he discovered that there were a lot of Nepalese refugees who had moved to Tasmania. So they went to Tasmania and they began a church, starting it from nothing. And he said, we now have 120 people in our church. And he said, it's been amazing the way, as we've fasted and prayed, that God has just opened up things for us. He said, somebody gave us an old car, and we realized there was a need in our area of Tasmania for migrants to get a driving license, but they couldn't afford driving lessons. So he said, we use this old car, and he said, we give free driving lessons to migrants. He said, Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and he said, we're just loving them into God's kingdom. And then he said, we've just had a real answer to prayer, and he was so excited. He said, somebody has just given us a brand new $50,000 car for our driving school. I thought, whoa, the way God works. And he was just so joyful at what God was doing as their church was growing. Another guy that made a big impression on us was Philip Gruzic, who is the pastor of Zagreb Baptist Church in Croatia. And he led a Bible study that was really, really fascinating. It was just such an insight into the scriptures. But at the end of his Bible study, he said, I'm going to tell you a parable. And he said, I might get fairly emotional as I tell this. And he told this parable, but I was sitting there thinking, I wish you hadn't told the parable, because I wish you'd told the real story behind the parable. And so I want to tell you the real story behind the parable. The parable is based on the Massachusetts Humane Society. In the island of Nantucket, The coastline, this is Nantucket, Massachusetts in the USA, the coastline around Nantucket Island is extremely dangerous. It's rocky, the weather is often wild, the fog obscures vision, and they say that there are 700 sailing ships that have been wrecked just on that coast. So many lives were lost that a group of volunteers decided to become lifesavers. It wasn't their job. They were all volunteers, but they banded together to become the Massachusetts Humane Society. And they built little huts of refuge along the shore with boats and equipment in them, and they had people who were watching the sea all the time on the lookout for ships that were going down, for people who needed to be saved, for people in distress, because they wanted to save every life they could. They did it in addition to their jobs. They didn't do it for recognition. They did it because they believed there was something precious and valuable about human life. And to remind each other of what was at stake and how seriously they had to take this task, they adopted a motto. And the motto was this: you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. Great recruitment motto, eh? You have to go out, but you don't have to come back. These people would risk their lives for people that they'd never met. And on March the 31st, 1879, a violent storm swept across Nantucket Island and Nantucket Sound, bringing powerful winds, freezing rain, snow, and heavy fog. And by the dawn of April 1st, 1879, 68 ships lay wrecked or disabled around the island. And in that violent storm, one lifeboat crew rowed out in their boat, and they rowed for 32 hours without a break, rescuing 40 sailors. Was it worth it? Of course it was. But over time, things changed. The United States Coast Guard was formed, and they began to take this task over. And for a while, the Coast Guard and the Life-Saving Society worked alongside each other, but eventually the idea spread, we ought to let the professionals do it because they're better trained and they get paid for it. And eventually, the volunteers stopped searching the coastline for sinking ships. They stopped sending teams out to rescue drowning people. Funny thing was, they couldn't bear to disband. They couldn't bring themselves to disband the Life-Saving Society, even though they were no longer in the life-saving business. They kept meeting in the city of Boston. They kept having dinners together. They told stories of past rescues. They handed out awards for community service. They continued to enjoy each other's company and have good fellowship together. They just weren't in the life-saving business anymore. It happens all the time. It doesn't happen in a day or a month or a year. But over time, a church or a ministry forgets that it's in the life-saving business. It usually doesn't disband. People still meet, they enjoy each other's company, they have good fellowship together, they tell stories of past rescues, they spend a lot of time studying the rescue manual. They sing lots of songs of how good it is to be rescued themselves. They have dinners together, they have service programs, they may even get involved in some form of community activity. It's unbelievably sad. It can happen. It can happen to a church. It can happen to a small group. It can happen to a children's ministry or a youth ministry. It can happen to an individual. Don't think it can't happen here. And whether we stay in the life-saving business is mostly in the hands of the people who are gathered here today. Jesus said the Son of Man came to seek and to save those who are lost.